How does the tech that runs our world really work? We break it down to its fundamental truths. This is First Principles.
You press the power button on your laptop. For a split second, nothing happens. And then, in a silent flash, the screen illuminates. The logo appears. A loading bar zips across the screen so quickly you barely have time to register it. And before you can even take a sip of your coffee, you're looking at your desktop, your icons, your wallpaper, your files, all there, ready to go. The entire process takes maybe 10 seconds. It feels effortless. It feels like nothing, and that's the point. We live in an age of instantaneous access. Our digital lives are summoned from the void in the blink of an eye. Our photos, our music, our work, our entire operating systems, they all exist in this strange, silent limbo when the machine is off, and then materialize instantly when it's on. We've become so accustomed to this speed that we now feel a deep, primal impatience with anything less. A 30-second boot time feels like an eternity. A spinning beach ball on a screen is a modern form of torture. The magic of the instanton world has become our baseline expectation. But have you ever stopped to wonder how that actually works? Not just in a vague, it's a computer chip kind of way. I mean, what is actually happening inside that thin slab of metal and plastic? How can a solid, motionless object hold trillions of pieces of information and serve them up in a fraction of a second? There are no moving parts. There is no sound. It's just a silent memory. It's a black box we rely on completely, but understand almost not at all. What are the fundamental rules, the first principles, that allow a piece of refined sand to remember your life's work? Today, we are opening that black box. We're going to deconstruct the silent heart of modern computing, the solid-state drive, or SSD. We're going to journey from the magical experience of instanton technology down to the bizarre quantum-level trick that makes it all possible. And along the way, we're going to discover that the story of the SSD isn't just about making things faster. It's a story about embracing imperfection and building genius systems to manage a fundamental flaw. The magic we see every day is one of seamless, silent speed. For anyone who used a computer before, say 2010, the difference is night and day. Loading a big application like a video editor or a complex game used to be a ritual. You'd double-click the icon, and then the computer would begin to think. You'd hear it, physically hear it, whirring and clicking. A tiny, rhythmic, mechanical sound from within the machine. It was the sound of work being done. You could go make that cup of coffee, maybe check your phone, and by the time you got back, it might be ready. That sound was the sound of a mechanical arm, not much different in principle from the arm on a record player, skating back and forth across a spinning magnetic platter. This was the hard disk drive, the HDD. For over half a century, it was the primary way we stored digital information. Imagine a stack of incredibly dense, perfectly polished metal disks, spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute. Floating just nanometers above the surface of these platters is a tiny read-write head, mounted on a lightning-fast actuator arm. To find a piece of data, a single photo for instance, that arm had to physically move to the right track, and then wait for the right section of the spinning platter to pass underneath it. It was a marvel of miniature mechanical engineering, but it was still, at its heart, mechanical. It was limited by the same physics that limits a vinyl record or a spinning top. There's a ceiling on how fast you can spin something before it flies apart, and a limit on how fast a physical arm can move back and forth. For decades, the entire speed of computing, every new processor, every new stick of RAM, was ultimately held back by this one unavoidable bottleneck. The computer could think at the speed of light, but it could only remember at the speed of sound and motion. The solid-state drive changed everything. It stores the exact same data, the ones and zeros, but it does so with no motion at all. It's solid. The name says it all. There are no spinning platters, no moving heads. Information is retrieved not by physical movement, but by sending a purely electrical signal. It's the difference between finding a book in a library by sending a robotic arm to scan every single shelf versus simply knowing the book's exact location and instantly teleporting it into your hands. This is why your laptop boots in seconds. This is why huge programs load in a flash. We didn't just make a faster hard drive. We replaced the entire concept of physical memory with something far more elegant, something that operates on a completely different set of principles. But this just deepens the mystery. How do you store something in a solid object? If memory isn't motion, what is it? To understand the genius of the SSD, we first have to understand the world it replaced. We have to understand the problem it was built to solve. For that, we need to go back to the era of big, noisy, beige computer towers. The problem wasn't just speed, it was also fragility. Because a hard disk drive was a delicate dance of moving parts, it was incredibly vulnerable to the physical world. If you've ever dropped a laptop and then heard a terrifying clicking or grinding sound on startup, that was the sound of the read-write head crashing into the magnetic platter, a catastrophic event for your data. The engineers knew this was a problem. The military in particular needed data storage that could survive in tanks, in airplanes, in battlefield conditions, where vibrations and shocks were a constant reality. The dream was always to create a form of memory with no moving parts, a solid-state memory. Early forms existed, like the RAM in your computer, but they were volatile. Volatile means they needed constant power to remember anything. The moment you cut the power, all the information vanished. That's great for temporary workspace, but useless for long-term storage. You needed a non-volatile memory, something that could hold onto its information even when the power was off. The challenge seemed almost philosophical. How do you get a piece of silicon to remember a state, a 1 or a 0, indefinitely, without power and without physically altering it? You can't just carve a 1 into the silicon. You need a switch that can be flipped on or off electronically, but that will stay in its last position even when you unplug the machine. The quest was on to build a better switch. The breakthrough came from building on a device that was already the bedrock of all modern electronics. The transistor. A standard transistor is a simple semiconductor switch. It has 3 connections: a source, a drain, and a gate. You can think of it like a drawbridge. The source is one side of the river, the drain is the other. The path between them is the bridge. The gate is the bridge operator. When the operator at the gate applies a small positive voltage, the bridge lowers, and electrical current, a flow of electrons, can pass from the source to the drain. The switch is on. When the voltage is removed, the bridge raises and the flow stops. The switch is off. This is the fundamental building block of all computer logic. But this standard transistor is volatile. The moment the bridge operator, the voltage, goes away, the bridge goes back up. It doesn't remember that it was just open. So, in the late 1960s, engineers at Bell Labs, Dawon Kong and Simon Z, were experimenting with transistors. They came up with a brilliant modification. They thought, what if we could build a transistor with a way to trap the bridge operator? What if, instead of the operator just leaving when the power is cut, we could lock him in his little control booth? They designed a new kind of transistor with a crucial addition. Between the normal gate and the channel where the electrons flow, they inserted an extra, very special layer. This layer was completely isolated from everything around it by a thin wall of oxide, an insulator. They called this new isolated layer the floating gate. This is it. This is the heart of the whole machine. The floating gate is the first principle of solid-state memory. So let's open the box. Let's build an analogy. Forget transistors and electrons for a moment. Imagine a tiny, perfectly sealed, windowless room. This room represents one cell in our SSD, a place where we can store a single bit of information, a 1 or a 0. Outside the room, there's a hallway filled with people. These people are our electrons. The room has a very special door. It's a high-tech turnstile. You can force your way in through the turnstile if you push hard enough, but once you're inside, the turnstile locks behind you. You can't get out. The room is sealed. Now let's say we want to store a 0 in this room. That's our default state. A 0 simply means the room is empty. Easy enough. But what if we want to store a 1? To store a 1, we need to get some people, our electrons, into that sealed room. To do this, we apply a very high voltage. This is like hiring a big, strong bouncer. The bouncer grabs a small crowd of people from the hallway and shoves them with great force through the turnstile and into the room. It's a brute force process. The people are now trapped inside the room. Congratulations, you have just written a 1 to this memory cell. The room is now full. The most important part is this. The bouncer can now leave. The power can be turned off, but the people are still stuck in the room. The room remembers that it's full. It is holding a state of 1 with no power required. This is non-volatile memory. The floating gate in a real transistor is our sealed room, and the trapped electrons are our crowd of people. The high voltage is the force that shoves the electrons across the insulating oxide layer and onto the floating gate where they become trapped. So we've successfully stored a 1. But that's only half the battle. How do we know it's there? How do we read the data? We can't open the room to check, because that would let all the people out. We need a way to know if the room is full or empty without ever opening the door. This is where the cleverness of the transistor design comes back in. Let's add to our analogy. Imagine there's a hallway that runs directly underneath the floor of our sealed room. This hallway is our channel, the path from the source to the drain. Normally, people can walk through this hallway freely. Now think about gravity. If our sealed room above is empty, 0 feet, it has no effect on the hallway below. People can pass through underneath, no problem. The switch is on. But what happens if the room is full of people, 1 foot? The combined weight of all those people in the room presses down on the floor. The floor sags, blocking the hallway underneath. No one can get through. The presence of the trapped people in the room upstairs has effectively blocked the path downstairs. The switch is off. This is exactly how a floating gate transistor works. The trapped electrons on the floating gate create a negative electrical field. This field pushes back against any electrons trying to flow in the channel below it, effectively blocking the path. So, to read the state of the cell, we don't look at the floating gate itself. We just try to send a small trickle of current through the channel underneath. If the current flows, we know the floating gate must be empty. The cell is a 0. If the current doesn't flow, we know it's being blocked by trapped electrons on the floating gate above. The cell must be a 1. We can check the state of the room without ever opening the door, simply by seeing if the hallway underneath is open or blocked. That is the core fundamental principle of almost all modern solid-state storage. A tiny microscopic room for electrons, a process to force them in, and a way to check if they're there without letting them out. Now, multiply that by billions, or trillions. An SSD with 1 terabyte of storage has roughly 8 trillion of these tiny rooms, each capable of storing a single bit. Every file on your computer, every photo, every email is just a vast collection of these rooms. Some empty, some full. When you save a document, you are sending out an army of microscopic bouncers to shove electrons into trillions of designated rooms. When you open that document, you are simply checking which of those rooms are full and which are empty, and it all happens at the speed of electricity. There is one piece of the puzzle missing, though. We've trapped the electrons. But what if we want to delete the file? What if we want to change that 1 back to a 0? We need a way to get the people out of the room. We can't just open the door. Remember, the turnstile is one way. To erase a cell, we need an even bigger bouncer. We apply a strong voltage in the opposite direction. A strong negative voltage. In our analogy, this is like creating a powerful vacuum in the hallway outside the room. This vacuum is so strong that it actually yanks the people back out through the turnstile. One by one, this process, called quantum tunneling, is the only way out. By applying this reverse voltage, we suck the trapped electrons off the floating gate, returning the cell to its empty, 0 state, ready to be written to again. So now we have the full cycle. We write by forcing electrons in. We read by checking their effect on the path below. And we erase by yanking them back out. This is the elegant, solid-state dance that replaced the spinning platter and the moving arm. It's a system of beautiful simplicity. But it holds a dark secret, a fatal flaw. This is the point where we often stop. We marvel at the cleverness of the engineering, and we accept the magic. But the philosophy of this show is to go deeper, to find the unseen principle that everything else depends on. And for the solid-state drive, the deepest truth lies not in its perfection, but in its profound imperfection. Let's go back to our analogy of the room and the turnstile. Every time our bouncer shoves people into the room, and every time the vacuum yanks them back out, that turnstile takes a beating. Forcing people through a one-way door in both directions is a violent process. The delicate locking mechanism gets scuffed and scraped. The hinges get strained. Over time, the turnstile starts to wear out. After thousands and thousands of uses, it might get stuck open, allowing people to leak out of the room when they shouldn't. Or it might get jammed shut, preventing new people from being forced in. The room becomes unreliable. A 1 might slowly fade into a 0, or a 0 might become permanently stuck, unable to ever become a 1. This is not just an analogy. This is the physical reality for an SSD, the thin oxide layer that insulates the floating gate. Our turnstile is incredibly delicate. It's only a few atoms thick. Every time you force electrons through it with a high voltage, you cause a tiny infinitesimal amount of damage to its molecular structure. This is called right degradation. Over time, this damage accumulates. The oxide layer begins to leak, and it can no longer reliably trap electrons. The cell fails. This is the common misconception about SSDs. Because they have no moving parts, many people assume they will last forever, that they are immune to the mechanical failures of old hard drives. But they aren't immortal. They just die a different kind of death. They don't crash. They fade. Each cell in an SSD has a finite number of times it can be reliably written to and erased before it wears out. For a typical consumer drive, this limit might be a few thousand cycles per cell. A few thousand cycles might sound like a lot, but think about how you use a computer. Every time you save a file, install a program, or even just browse the web, your computer is writing data. Some files are written and erased constantly. The temporary files your operating system uses, for example, can be overwritten hundreds of times in a single session. If the computer always used the same few memory cells for these temporary files, those cells would wear out and fail in a matter of weeks or months. while the rest of a drive, where you store your family photos, might never be written to at all. Your terabyte drive would effectively shrink, becoming more and more unreliable until it was useless. This fatal flaw should have doomed the entire technology. It would be like selling a notebook where you could only write on each page a few times before the paper disintegrated. So how did we solve it? How did this fundamentally flawed, self-destructing memory become the foundation of modern computing? The answer is the true genius of the SSD. The solution wasn't in the hardware. We couldn't build a perfect indestructible turnstile. The laws of physics wouldn't allow it, so the solution had to be in software. An invisible, incredibly intelligent layer of software that lives on the drive itself, on a tiny dedicated processor right there on the SSD circuit board. This software is the unseen giant. Its job is called wear leveling. Wear leveling is one of the most elegant concepts in modern engineering. The drive's controller, the little computer running this software, is like a brilliant and slightly paranoid hotel manager. It has a hotel with trillions of rooms, and it knows that every time a guest checks in and out of a room, it causes a tiny bit of wear and tear. If it always put the most frequent guests in the same rooms near the lobby, those rooms would quickly become dilapidated, while the rooms on the top floor would remain pristine. A smart hotel manager wouldn't do that. They would meticulously track the usage of every single room, and they would intentionally spread the guests around, ensuring that over the course of a year, every room in the hotel is used roughly the same number of times. The lobby rooms, the penthouse suites, the corner rooms, they all get an equal amount of wear. This dramatically extends the life of the entire hotel. This is exactly what the SSD controller does. It maintains a secret map. When your computer's operating system says, "Hey, save this file to memory address 100, the SSD controller intercepts that command. It might say, "Okay, got it," but internally it doesn't necessarily put the data in physical cell 100. It looks at its own map and asks, which of my trillions of cells have been used the least? It finds a fresh, rarely used cell, say cell number 5,482,193, and it puts the data there instead. Then it secretly updates its own internal map, so that the next time the computer asks for the data, at address 100, the controller knows to actually retrieve it from physical cell 5,482,193. This process is happening constantly, thousands of times a second, completely invisible to you and your operating system. The drive is constantly shuffling data around in the background, moving data from hot areas that are frequently changed to cold areas that are rarely touched. It's a relentless microscopic shell game, designed to distribute the wear and tear as evenly as possible across every single one of its trillions of memory cells. This is the aha moment. The reliability of an SSD doesn't come from the perfection of its physical components. It comes from an incredibly sophisticated software system designed to manage the imperfection of its components. The hardware is fundamentally fragile. The software makes it robust. It's an admission that you can't achieve perfection at the atomic level. So you must build a layer of intelligence on top to orchestrate a longer, more useful life. The complexity doesn't stop there. Modern SSDs have taken this concept even further. As technology has shrunk, manufacturers have figured out how to store more than one bit in a single room. Instead of just checking if the room is full or empty, they can distinguish between different levels of fullness. Maybe a room with just a few people in it is A01, a half-full room is A10, and a completely packed room is A11. This allows a single cell to store 2, 3, or even 4 bits of data, dramatically increasing the density and lowering the cost. But this comes at a price. Distinguishing between 4 different levels of fullness is much more delicate than just checking for full or empty. It requires more precise voltages and makes the cell even more sensitive to the damage of write cycles. These higher density cells wear out much faster. So the wear leveling algorithms have had to become exponentially more complex, managing not just the wear on each cell, but also intelligently deciding which kinds of data to store in which kinds of cells, all while juggling error correction codes to fix the inevitable mistakes that happen as the cells age. The silent, simple slab of memory in your laptop is, in reality, a hive of frantic, invisible activity, a constant battle against its own inevitable decay. So let's bring it all back. We started with the magic of an instanton computer, a seamless experience of speed and silence that we all take for granted. We've journeyed inside that silent chip, past the complex surface and down to the first principles. And what did we find? We found a trick of quantum mechanics that allows us to trap a handful of electrons in a microscopic, insulated room. We learned that the state of our digital world, every 1 and every 0, is determined by whether these trillions of tiny rooms are empty or full. We discovered that we can check on these rooms by seeing if their occupants are metaphorically blocking the hallway underneath. But most importantly, we found the flaw in the magic. We discovered that the very act of using this memory, of forcing electrons in and out of their rooms, physically damages the structure, causing it to wear out. The silent memory is slowly forgetting how to remember. And in that flaw, we found the real story. The story of a brilliant piece of software, an unseen manager that works tirelessly to hide this imperfection from us. It juggles and shuffles our data, spreading the burden of memory across trillions of identical cells to ensure that they all age gracefully together. The solid-state drive is not a perfect piece of hardware. It is a testament to the power of intelligent systems. It's a partnership between fragile physics and resilient logic. Understanding this teaches us something profound about the nature of modern technology. We often think of progress as the invention of perfect, flawless objects. But more often, true progress comes from inventing something that is merely good enough and then wrapping it in a layer of intelligence that manages its flaws so elegantly that they become invisible. The speed we experience isn't just the speed of electrons. It's the speed of a clever system mitigating a fundamental weakness. The next time you turn on your computer and your world snaps into existence in a few silent seconds, remember what's actually happening. You are witnessing the beautiful, frantic, and invisible dance of a system that has taught a piece of sand how to think, how to remember, and most impressively, how to gracefully forget its own limitations.
You've been listening to First Principles. Until next time, stay curious.